Hey guys, tonight we drift back to the marble-paved streets of ancient Rome, lit by oil lamps that flicker in the summer dusk. The air smells faintly of baking bread from a corner stall, mixed with incense wafting from a nearby temple. Around you, the hum of conversation blends with the clatter of sandals on stone, merchants bargaining, senators murmuring in togas that cost more than your yearly rent, and children darting through the crowd chasing a rag ball. The empire seems eternal, indestructible. If you squint, you might even believe the marble is glowing from within. But here's the reality check. You probably wouldn't survive this place for long. The water from those magnificent aqueducts? Not exactly bacteria-free. The streets? Let's just say the sanitation department was mostly a guy with a broom and a strong stomach. And behind all this grandeur, there are cracks forming, hairline fissures that no one wants to talk about. YET.so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander past the Forum, where statues of long-dead generals glare down with polished marble eyes. The Senate building stands tall, but the debates inside have become less about ideals and more about who gets which slice of the pie. Rome's roads stretch out in every direction, a stone web holding together a realm so vast you could walk for months and still be under the same laws, though they might be enforced with a little interpretation depending on who's in charge that week. And yet, the city is humming with trade. Silks from China, spices from India, amber from the cold Baltic shores. It's all here. Gold. Coins change hands in markets where exotic parrots screech from their cages. But you notice something odd. The coins feel lighter than they should. Historians still argue whether this creeping devaluation was deliberate or just sloppy minting. But you sense an unease in the air, like someone quietly rearranging deck chairs on a certain doomed ship. Then there's the sheer weight of it all, Rome's. Roads, aqueducts, baths, amphitheaters. They're marvels, yes, but also massive drains on manpower and coin. A few clever engineers, with wax tablets covered in calculations, are already whispering that repairs are being delayed longer and longer. You can almost hear the sigh of marble under strain that a vendor offers you a honey cake, sticky and sweet. And you take a bite. It's delicious, but it sticks to your teeth while a distant legionnaire stomps past, armor gleaming. He's heading for the northern frontier, where word has it some restless tribes have been testing the borders again. You wonder if anyone here, enjoying their cakes, debating the merits of different olive oils, realizes just how thin the imperial skin has become. The sun sinks, gilding the city in a warm glow, but you can't shake the feeling that beneath the gold, something fragile is waiting to give way. The next morning, you wake to the sound of a coppersmith hammering somewhere down the street. The rhythm is steady, almost hypnotic, like the empire itself, a beat that feels eternal until you realize how easily it could falter. You step into the street, dodging a mule cart loaded with amphorae, and your eye catches a group of veterans lounging in the shade. They're swapping stories, but the tone isn't one of glory, it's one of frustration. The army, once the disciplined backbone of Rome, is shifting. Once, soldiers were citizen farmers called up to defend their land. Now, more and more are mercenaries from the very fringes of the empire. Some fight with loyalty. Others, you suspect, are in it for the pay, and with the treasury stretching thin, even that's not guaranteed. Historians still argue whether the reliance on these foreign troops was an act of strategic genius or a slow-rolling disaster. You watch as a scarred man with a Germanic accent takes a swig of watered wine, his eyes scanning the crowd as though gauging friend from foe. You follow the noise toward the parade ground. There's a drill underway, lines of men in mismatched armor, some shields polished, others dented and dull. The officers bark orders, but the cohesion feels off, like a machine missing a few key gears. You remember the stories of Rome's legions marching in perfect unison, a wall of shields and spears that could break any enemy. This feels looser, patched together, and there's the cost. Out on the frontiers, Germania, Britannia, the deserts of the East, keeping legions supplied is like trying to water a vineyard through a straw. Grain ships from Africa, caravans from Gaul, wagons from the Danube. All must make their way to the far edges, and bandits, bad weather, and unofficial toll collectors take their share. It's a logistical marvel when it works, and a slow bleed when it doesn't. An officer notices you watching and invites you to see the weapons store. You step into the dim armory, smelling of oiled leather and old iron. Racks of gladii line the walls, but the blades are chipped and the hilts worn smooth from years of use. A few newer weapons gleam, but there aren't enough of them. The Senate promised funds, the officer mutters, but promises don't sharpen steel. In the corner, a young recruit struggles to fasten his helmet strap. You can't help but smile. It's endearing, but also unsettling. This is the shield between Rome and the outside world. You imagine him on a foggy frontier, facing warriors who've never heard of the Senate but know exactly how to swing an axe. Still, the army moves forward because it must. Campaign season comes and goes, and the legions march under the eagle standard. But you notice the civilians treat the soldiers less like heroes now and more like a costly necessity, like paying for flood walls you hope never to use. There's gratitude, but it's thinned. A rumor drifts your way. Some legions haven't been paid in months. You picture that, thousands of men, armed and trained, looking at their commander and thinking, maybe they could just take what they're owed. Historians debate whether this happened often or rarely, but the fear is there. In every cautious glance between citizen and soldier, as you leave the parade ground, the afternoon sun is high and relentless. You duck into the shade of an archway, tracing the carved Latin inscription overhead. The stone feels cool under your hand, but there's a faint crack running through the S of SBQR. You wonder if anyone else notices. You wonder if the army, this proud machine, can keep patching itself together fast enough to hold the edges in place. Somewhere, a coppersmith hammers on. The rhythm is still steady, but you know now it's possible for a hammer to miss a beat. Asterisk. You wander uphill from the parade ground, following a slope of marble steps worn hollow by important sandals. The Palatine glows in the noon light. Arches, porticos, shadowed colonnades where courtiers float like well-fed ghosts. Inside, the temperature drops and the air takes on a faint perfume of cedar oil, beeswax, and ambition. You pause in a hall where frescoes show heroes with flawless profiles. The real profiles breeze past you with rings heavy enough to anchor a ship and faces arranged into polite interest. You don't need a guidebook to know this is where the empire runs on whispers. That a clerk ushers you toward a long table crowded with wax tablets, reed pens, and bowls of purple ink. He smiles with the weary kindness of a man who knows paperwork can outlive any emperor. A notary dictates figures, grain shipments, tax quotas, troop provisions. Numbers march like legions until they wobble. Adjust that by a consideration. The notary murmurs, and a scribe obliges. You notice the digits get rounder, friendlier, and somehow less believable. Joke one tiptoes in. Paperwork seems to reproduce at night, because every morning there are more forms than yesterday. Mainstream fact. The imperial bureaucracy swelled in the later centuries. New offices for revenue. There comes sacrarum largitionum. For the emperor's private estates, there comes rerum privatarum. For grain, for arms, for almost everything. Salaries, perquisites, and the power to grant favors turn desks into battlements. You watch a minor official accept a sealed basket from a merchant. Grapes nestling on top, but the weight says there's something sturdier beneath. He doesn't open it. He doesn't need to. A senator in carefully casual dignity glides by, trailed by a secretary carrying 3 signet rings on a cord for convenience. The senator pauses at a statue niche, as if admiring the marble the merchant from. The basket drifts to the same niche. They share a silence thick as honey cake. When they part, the senator's sleeve looks heavier, the merchant's shoulders lighter. No one saw a transaction. Everyone saw it. Historians still argue whether corruption worsened in the late empire or whether sources simply began to record it more cheerfully. Some point to the auction of the throne by the Praetorian Guard centuries earlier, a dark party trick that set an unforgettable precedent. Others counter that bribery is the background radiation of big states, constant and easy to blame when the roof begins to leak. You don't settle the debate. You just watch a door open if you knock with a full purse. A steward leads you into a smaller chamber where municipal delegates fidget on benches, hats in hands. They're decurions, the town councilors who are obliged to collect taxes and fund public works. Their faces carry that tight, polite panic of people volunteering for a job they can't resign. One whispers that his city's bathhouse roof needs tile, the aqueduct needs repair, the granary needs rebuilding, and the Annona demand from Rome didn't shrink just because the harvest did. He rubs his temples as if the numbers have sharp edges. The clerk assures him the emperor appreciates loyal service, which sounds lovely and spends poorly. Quirky tidbit. One delegate swears by a lucky seal, a tiny bronze dolphin, kissed before petitions. He presses it to the wax of every request, convinced that success sticks better if it swims in with a fish. You're not sure whether the officials love the dolphin or just enjoy a good story when saying yes costs nothing. In a corner, two advocates argue in velvet voices about a provincial governor, brilliant administrator, or creative accountant. The word largest swims between them like a tame eel. You catch a phrase, fees of friendship, and blink at the elegance of it. Gifts, tips, facilitation, the vocabulary of smooth joints in a creaking machine. A secretary sips watered wine and writes names in a tidy column, lips pursed in an expression that translates to, "I will remember who greased which hinge." You drift into a corridor lined with map tablets, little pegs indicating trouble spots, Rhine crossings, Danube raids, a muttering in Britain. Each peg represents a budget request and a chance to decide who waits and who gets steel. The treasurer gently reminds a general that coin is lighter than it used to be, debased over years to stretch a too thin blanket over too many limbs. You think back to the honey cake vendor and the coins that felt suspiciously weightless in your palm. Here, the lightness has paperwork attached. An elderly scholar shuffles by with a bundle of wax tablets and a look of defeat. "We used to call it virtus," he murmurs, "that stiff old Roman virtue that made men do hard things for the common good." He taps the tablets. "Now we call it per diem." The line lands with a sigh, not a sneer. He wanders off as if searching for an honest ledger that went missing in a previous century. Historians still argue whether moral decline is a cause or a convenient metaphor, whether talking about lost virtue explains anything beyond human nostalgia. Economic models, military math, demographic charts, these speak a harder language. Yet inside the halls, you feel the drag of tiny, everyday bargains. The way a petition floats faster if it carries a sweetener, the way a post goes to a cousin. If the cousin's handwriting looks convincingly official, the chamberlain ushers you, briefly, near the imperial audience room. Courtiers simmer at the edges, whispering about appointments in Africa, a customs lease in Alexandria, a bishop who needs soothing, a frontier commander who needs reminding. Someone jokes, too loudly, that honest men make poor courtiers because they never carry baskets. The laughter is thin and nervous, like a lyre string tuned too tight. There's a rattling tray of signet rings again. You think of those lucky charms. Another quirky habit. A few officials dab Tyrian purple dye on their fingers before sealing letters, even if the dye stains refuse to fade for days. "Better to look like I shook hands with the sea," one says, "than with poverty." Joke. Two bubbles up. You hope he has a budget for soap, because that purple looks as permanent as bad policy. Down a side stair, you pass a room of auditors who hum like bees over figures. One raises an eyebrow at a column that does a little dance from black to red. He marks it with a stylus, not viciously, just firmly, the bureaucratic equivalent of clearing your throat in a cathedral. He notices you watching. "We do catch some of it," he says, "but water finds cracks you don't know about yet." He blows dust from the wax and reaches for the next tablet. As patient as the coppersmith's hammer you woke to this morning, a young officer in crisp boots lingers outside the audience door, clutching a petition for pay arrears. He's rehearsed. The speech, you can tell, chin angle, left-hand gesture, the part where he says "for Rome," with just the right tremor. A chamberlain glides over, murmurs something about timing, suggests a small token for the staff so the petition doesn't get lost among harvest reports. The officer blinks, calculates, and adjusts his expectations downward by one new helmet. You remember the crack in the stone S of SBQR and wonder how many such hairlines a state can bear before the carving becomes dust. Not all is graft. You meet a prefect who refuses a bribe with a smile that could polish brass, an accountant who returns a coin purse dropped by a courier, a clerk who stays late to copy a law so a town can stop guessing at rules. The chords aren't all frayed, but you sense how the weight shifts onto those few chords and how easily someone could saw at them with a polite knife. In the courtyard, a fountain trickles over worn marble, the water clear enough to mirror your frown. A slave tosses crumbs to pigeons who never have to file petitions, and you laugh despite yourself. Joke 3 lands softly. Somewhere, a pigeon is writing a treatise on efficient grain distribution, and no one will read it the afternoon. Light slants. A last scene. A city magistrate leaving with deliberate dignity. A merchant slipping out by the servant's stairs. A scribe rubbing purple from his fingers that won't come clean. The empire still moves. The edicts go out. The ships sail. The taxes arrive. But you feel the grit in the gears, the tiny hesitations that multiply. You step back into the corridor where fresco heroes flex flawless marble virtue and wonder if anyone ever bribed them to hold still. The courtyard smells of beeswax and sun-warmed stone. A bell tinkles somewhere in the complex, and for a heartbeat, the place sounds like a temple. Then a door closes with the soft, confident click of a lock well-oiled by friendship, and you know the temple is a counting house with nicer columns. The street bends gently toward the river, and the air cools with each step. You can smell it before you see it. The mix of water, silt, fish, and something else, something you decide not to investigate too closely. The Tiber has always been Rome's artery, carrying goods, people, and the occasional political exile downstream. You lean against the worn stone parapet and watch barges drift past, their crews shouting in rhythms that feel older than the city itself on the near bank. Dockworkers unload amphorae, sacks of grain, and crates that rattle like they're full of pottery or bones. The stevedores' muscles gleam under the afternoon sun, and their backs curve like the river's own banks. One drops a crate, curses in Greek, and kicks it as if the damage might unbreak whatever's inside. Mainstream. Fact, the river's traffic was once the beating heart of Rome's economy. Grain from Egypt, oil from Spain, wine from Gaul, it all floated here before winding through the city's markets. But by the late Empire, silting, neglect, and pirate raids upriver slowed the flow. Docks were quieter, merchants warier, and the cost of getting goods here had climbed like ivy on a neglected wall. A fisherman nearby pulls in his net and groans. The catch is thin, 2 fish, 1 boot. He shrugs at you. Better than last week, he says, and you decide not to ask which item he means. Quirky tidbit. Some locals still whisper about the time a fisherman supposedly hauled up a statue head from the riverbed, and for months it was paraded around the city as an omen, until someone realized it was just an old theater prop tossed. After a bad play, you wander toward a small riverside tavern where the scent of spiced wine drifts from an open doorway. Inside, the low beams force you to duck, and the single oil lamp paints everything in syrupy amber. A bargeman sits in the corner with a jug and a story that seems to be unfolding for anyone who'll listen. He's describing the time a Germanic raiding party tried to cross the river in the dead of night, only to have their boat break apart midstream. Couldn't tell if they drowned or just decided they didn't like Rome that much, he says. Historians still argue whether such raids were minor irritants or serious warnings of the empire's fraying borders. Outside again, you follow the wharf toward the warehouses. Their brick walls sweat in the humid air, and carved marks over the doors, bundles of wheat, amphora shapes, advertise what's inside. One warehouse stands open, revealing stacks of grain sacks tied with fraying rope. A clerk scratches at his tablet, muttering numbers under his breath. You catch shortage and overcharge before he notices you and scowls. Further down, the stonework of the embankment grows patchy, and the wooden pilings groan with each passing wave. Here, the lesser merchants and smugglers cluster. You spot a man pretending to fix a net while his companion quietly exchanges coins for a wrapped bundle. Whatever's inside, it doesn't smell like fish. Joke 1 floats in. Rome's black market was so efficient, it probably had a better delivery service than half the official couriers. You take a side ramp down to the water's edge, where children squat in the mud, searching for nails and bits of pottery. One holds up a coin so worn it's just a disc of metal now. He beams as if he's found treasure. The others immediately argue over who gets to keep it. Watching them, you realize that, in a city this old, even the garbage has history clinging to it. By the time you climb back up, the light is shifting again. Shadows stretch long across the cobbles, and a breeze carries the smell of roasting meat from somewhere upstream. You cross a small bridge, its parapet nicked and dented from centuries of carts scraping by, and pause in the middle. From here, you can see the island that splits the river, its temple-turned hospital squatting like a stone ship in the current. Quirky note: the island's shape reminded some ancient Romans of a ship, so they even carved a prow and stern into its stone. Embankments. A little architectural cosplay never hurt anyone. You linger, watching the water swirl around the island, and imagine how many voices, in how many tongues, have floated over this same stretch. Orders, prayers, curses, love songs. The empire's veins may be clogging, its limbs aching, but here, the river still moves. It's both a comfort and a warning as you step off the bridge and back into the maze of streets. The sound of the water fades behind you, replaced by the shuffle of sandals, and the faint chime of a metalworker closing shop. Somewhere ahead, the scent of bread will draw you like a beacon, and somewhere beyond that, another fragment of Rome's story waits. You follow the scent of bread until it dissolves into a sharper tang, oil, leather, and sweat. The air feels thicker here, resonating with the metallic jangle of armor plates and the low rumble of men's voices. Ahead, an open training yard sprawls behind a timber fence, its gate unguarded. Inside, figures move in staccato bursts, the glint of sunlight catching on polished helmets and spear tips. You lean against the fence and watch. Two lines of soldiers advance toward each other, shields high, spears angled, boots slamming the dirt in perfect rhythm. The impact rattles through the air, thud, scrape, grunt. Then they disengage, reset, and do it again. Mainstream fact: by the late Empire, Rome's legions were not the citizen soldier forces of earlier centuries. Increasingly, they were composed of non-Roman recruits, Goths, Franks, Alemanni, men who fought for pay, land, or the promise of Roman citizenship. It kept numbers up, but it also changed the army's character. From a shady corner, an officer barks orders in Latin tinged with an accent from somewhere north of the Alps. A nearby group practices sword drills, blades smacking against wooden posts shaped like enemy torsos. A few soldiers swap jokes mid-swing, earning a glare from their instructor. You catch just enough to realize the punchline wouldn't make sense unless you'd once eaten something questionable in a frontier tavern. Quirky tidbit: some units were so multinational that commanders reportedly had to give orders in 3 different languages to make sure everyone understood: Latin, Greek, and whatever the recruits spoke back home. The result? Battlefields where half the army might not fully grasp what "hold the line" meant until it was too late. Near the yard's edge, a blacksmith works over a portable forge, hammering rivets into a battered breastplate. Sparks leap and vanish. Against the dusty air, you can smell the iron's heat, the tang of sweat and ash mingling into something sharp enough to taste. He dunks the metal into a barrel of water, steam hissing upward like an angry spirit. Historians still argue whether the reliance on these foreign recruits was a pragmatic adaptation or a fatal weakening of Rome's core military culture. You think about the men sweating in the sun here. How many would actually fight for the city itself, and how many for the coin in their hand? At the far end, you notice a quieter cluster, a trio of veterans, their armor dented and dulled, seated on a bench mending straps. One rolls a strip of leather between his fingers, the motion almost absent-minded. His face is a map of scars, the kind you don't get from training drills. He looks up, meets your gaze, and offers the barest nod, as if to say, "We've seen worse." Joke number 1 sneaks in. Given the state of imperial politics, you suspect these soldiers might need more training in backroom intrigue than in spear handling. A commotion draws your attention. A young recruit is sparring clumsily with a seasoned centurion. The older man sidesteps every blow with lazy precision, occasionally smacking the youth's helmet with the flat of his sword. "Your enemy won't wait for you to find your balance," he growls, before delivering a final tap that sends the recruits stumbling into the dust. The onlookers howl with laughter, the kind that says they've all been there once. You step away from the fence, following the clang and clatter toward the stables. Horses snort and stamp in their stalls, their flanks glossy under the dim light, filtering through slatted windows. A stable hand brushes down a tall bay gelding, murmuring in a language you don't recognize. In the corner, a young soldier adjusts the straps on a saddle, checking and rechecking each buckle with the focus of someone who knows that, in the field, a loose strap can cost a life. Outside, a cart piled high with javelins and shields rattles toward the yard. The driver, a wiry man with a grin missing more teeth than it keeps, calls out to a friend, "If these don't stop the barbarians, at least we can sell them the wood for their campfires." The sun is dipping lower now, casting the yard in long bars of gold and shadow. The men keep drilling, dust rising around their boots, each movement sharp against the softening light. You leave them behind, stepping back into the city's tangle of streets, the sounds of training fading into the background hum of Rome at dusk. Somewhere ahead, the bells of a church will soon mingle with the chants from a temple, two worlds, brushing against each other as the empire shifts beneath your feet. But for now, the echo of boots on dirt stays with you, a reminder that even the mightiest army can't march forever without faltering. You catch the first toll of a bell before you see where it's coming from. It's not the crisp clang of a temple gong, but a deeper, rounder sound, like bronze warmed by human hands and time. You follow it through a narrow alley, past laundry, lines sagging under the weight of wet tunics, until the walls open into a square where two buildings face each other like reluctant neighbors, a pagan temple with its worn columns, and a brand new Christian basilica, its roof tiles still the color of fresh clay. The temple steps are cracked, weeds creeping between the stones. An old priest sweeps them anyway, pausing to mutter something to a passing worshiper who clutches a sprig of laurel. Across the square, the basilica doors stand open. Inside, candlelight flickers against whitewashed walls, illuminating a crowd seated on plain benches. Mainstream fact: in the 4th century, Christianity shifted from a persecuted minority faith to the empire's official religion, especially after Emperor Constantine's Edict of Milan in 313 CE granted tolerance. Theologians filled the halls with debates over doctrine, while the state redirected funds once spent on temples toward churches and bishops. You step inside the basilica. The air smells faintly of beeswax and olive oil. A deacon in a rough wool robe reads from a parchment scroll, his voice echoing softly under the high wooden beams. Behind him, a simple cross hangs on the wall, a stark contrast to the temple's elaborate statues and gilt altars. Quirky tidbit: some early Christians reused the marble from dismantled pagan temples to build their churches, not as an insult, but as a practical move. You imagine the old gods looking down at their columns holding up a roof over an entirely different set of prayers. Historians still argue whether Christianity's rise hastened the empire's decline or simply transformed it. Some claim the focus on spiritual matters distracted leaders from military and civic duties. Others counter that the new faith offered unity and moral structure when politics failed. Outside again, you pause between the two buildings. To your left, incense smoke curls up from the temple doorway, carrying the scent of myrrh and crushed herbs. To your right, a cluster of women in plain veils leave the basilica, their voices low but urgent, as though what they've heard inside needs to be shared immediately. Joke number 1 arrives like a whisper. You suspect that if the gods and saints had ever actually met for a council, they'd spend most of the time arguing over seating arrangements. Farther down the square, a vendor sells bread and olives from a cart. A group of off-duty soldiers, still dusty from the training yard you left earlier, stop to buy snacks. One bites into a loaf and immediately spits it out, cursing the baker's heavy hand with salt. His friend laughs and says maybe the gods are punishing him for skipping both temple and church this week. As the sun drops, shadows pool between the buildings. You notice more people drifting toward the basilica than the temple now. The priest across the square pauses mid-sweep, watching them with a mix of resignation and defiance. He leans on his broom, as though the weight of centuries is resting on the bristles. You move on, down a street where shrines to household gods, little niches in the walls, still hold offerings: a coin, a dried fig, a sprig of rosemary. Yet, here and there, you see crosses scratched beside them, as if people aren't sure which protector to choose, and so hedge their bets. The chill rides the evening breeze, and with it, the low murmur of chanting from somewhere ahead. You follow it, to find a small procession carrying oil lamps, their flames trembling in the dusk. A boy at the front swings a censer, the scent of frankincense mingling with the city's usual cocktail of smoke and river damp. The two worlds, the old and the new, brush past each other in the street, not with open hostility tonight, but with the uneasy courtesy of neighbors who know change is coming and can't quite decide whether to embrace it or resist it. Asterisk, the air smells different when armies are camped nearby. Less of bread ovens and fish markets, more of horse sweat, boiled grain, and damp leather. You make your way toward the outskirts, where canvas tints cluster like mushrooms after rain. Here, the ground is churned into mud by 1,000 boots, and the constant low hum of voices carries the tension of men who aren't sure whether they'll be fighting for or against the emperor in a week's time. You pass a group of soldiers, sharpening swords by the light of a smoking torch. Their armor is mismatched. Some wear the traditional segmented larica, others newer chainmail, others little more than padded tunics. You overhear them debating which emperor will last. The season. There's a bitter laugh when one mentions how many times the purple cloak has changed hands lately. Mainstream fact. During the crisis of the 3rd century and beyond, Rome often had multiple rival emperors at once, each backed by their own army. Civil wars drained resources, left frontiers undefended, and eroded the people's faith in the imperial office. The standard flaps limply in the breeze, its faded eagle more dust than gold now. Beyond it, two commanders argue over a campaign map drawn on rough parchment. You can't tell if they're plotting a siege or just trying to figure out who actually outranks whom this week. Quirky tidbit: some soldiers would literally switch sides mid-battle if the opposing commander promised better pay or more generous loot. Imagine your office switching CEOs every Tuesday, and you get the general idea. Historians still argue whether these endless power struggles were the cause or the symptom of the empire's decline. Some point to personal ambition undermining the state. Others see it as inevitable in an empire too vast and diverse to stay under one ruler without constant tension. You skirt around the campfire where a storyteller has gathered an audience. He's recounting the latest rumor. A general from the eastern provinces claims divine visions that prove he's the rightful emperor. The men chuckle, one muttering that he'd believe it if the vision also brought free wine. At a sudden noise, hooves clattering, pulls your attention to the road. A messenger gallops in, mud spraying from his horse's legs. He slides off, salutes, and hands a sealed letter to one of the officers. The officer reads it, face tightening, then waves for the troops to assemble. You catch snippets. March. At dawn, intercept, traitor forces. Joke number 1 lands as you realize that in this empire, traitor simply means lost the last argument. Past the main camp, you find a quieter row of tents where older veterans sit repairing gear. One is patching a boot with slow, careful stitches, the leather worn thin at the toes. Another is cleaning a dented helmet, humming a song you don't recognize, something mournful that might be older than Rome itself. Here, the talk is less about politics and more about home, a son who's just learned to read, a vineyard that might be lost to frost. Yet even in these gentler conversations, you feel the undertow of uncertainty. No one is sure which way the wind will blow tomorrow. Beyond the camp, in the dark fields, torches bob along a line of watchmen pacing the perimeter. The city looms in the distance, its walls catching the faint glow of moonlight. From here, Rome seems calm, almost eternal, but you've just walked through the mud and murmurs that say otherwise. Somewhere in the night, a trumpet calls 3 sharp notes. Men rise, groaning, to check weapons and tighten belts. Another march, another gamble, on the loyalty of men whose oaths are as temporary as the emperor's latest decree. You follow the main road toward the heart of the city, and it's impossible not to notice how the stones under your feet tell their own quiet story. Smooth flagstones give way to cracked, uneven slabs, some replaced with mismatched pieces scavenged from older buildings. It's the Roman road system, the pride of centuries, now showing its age like an athlete long past his prime. Merchants still wheel their carts along it, though their voices have a weariness to them. One curses the ruts, where rainwater pools, splashing mud onto his figs. Another hawks pottery, but grumbles that half his wares shattered on the journey. You remember how, once, these roads were so precisely maintained that couriers could gallop for days without slowing. Now, well, let's just say if your wheel survives the trip, you buy it a victory wreath. Mainstream fact: Rome's roads were an engineering marvel, stretching over 250,000 miles at their peak, built in layered fashion with gravel, sand, and stone to withstand centuries of use. But upkeep was costly, and as the empire's finances faltered, repairs were often delayed or ignored entirely to the roadside. You see a curious sight: chunks of old marble columns repurposed as makeshift curbs. Quirky tidbit: Romans were surprisingly practical recyclers. If a once grand temple fell into disrepair, its fine stone might find new life as paving material, chicken coop walls, or even gaming tables in taverns. Historians still argue whether this reuse was clever thriftiness or a cultural sign of decline. A shrug toward the grandeur of the past in favor of immediate need. You pause to step aside for a small procession, a noble family traveling from their villa. Their litter-bearers tread carefully to avoid the worst cracks in the road, though the young nobleman inside seems too busy preening his hair in a polished bronze mirror to notice. One pothole later, the mirror catches him square on the nose. You pretend you didn't see that eye in the distance. The city gates rise, sturdy but patched in places with timber where stone once held. Guards lounge nearby, their armor dulled, spears leaning against the wall rather than held at the ready. The rhythm of inspections is lazy. A wagon loaded with amphorae rattles through after little more than a nod. Inside the gates, the road narrows and bends through tight clusters of buildings. Here, the scent changes: bread baking, herbs drying, but also the acrid bite of tanneries. A cobbler works at his stall, hammering nails into sandals, while two children chase each other between baskets of olives. Life goes on, even if the marble dust of Rome's golden days has settled into the cracks. You can't help but imagine what these streets looked like at their height: gleaming white paving stones, straight as an arrow, lined with statues and colonnades. Now the statues lean, noses missing, hands gone. Somewhere a washerwoman hangs laundry between two crumbling pillars that once supported a triumphal arch. A sudden drizzle begins, pooling in the road's depressions. Merchants pull tarps over their goods. A beggar shuffles under an awning. You step into the shelter of a portico, its columns pitted by centuries of weather. The rain taps steadily on the tiles, and for a moment, you can almost forget that outside the city, rival armies are still marching. That a runner splashes past, delivering a message to the forum. His sandals kick up droplets, and you notice his tunic is patched in 3 different colors of cloth, a walking summary of the empire itself, still holding together, but only just. And so, you keep moving, the sound of your footsteps echoing between old walls, carrying you deeper into a Rome that's both eternal and crumbling, proud and precarious, its roads leading forward, but no longer certain where they will end. You're standing in the shadow of the great Aurelian walls, their massive brick face streaked with the dark stains of centuries of weather. At one time, these ramparts had seemed invincible, solid, proof that Rome could hold out against any foe. But today, there's a hush over the streets, a heaviness in the air, as though even the walls themselves are holding their breath. The gates stand open, and a trickle of people moves in and out. Some carry baskets of grain, others bundles of firewood. A few keep their eyes fixed firmly on the ground, walking fast as though speed alone might keep trouble away. You glance up and notice something unusual. There are more lookouts than usual, posted along the battlements, and their eyes aren't on the markets. They're scanning the horizon. Then you hear it. Faint at first, a low, rhythmic beat like a drum far away. It could be your imagination, but no, there it is again. Louder now. Closer. Mainstream fact: in 410 AD, Rome was famously sacked by the Visigoths under Alaric. It was the first time in 800 years that the city had fallen to a foreign enemy, shocking not only the citizens but the entire Mediterranean world. And here, in this moment, You're feeling the tension of that day, the disbelief that an enemy could breach the heart of the empire. Many Romans had grown up with the idea that the city was untouchable, the center of the world, protected by the gods themselves. Quirky tidbit. Some contemporary accounts claim that on the night before the Visigoths entered, strange lights flickered in the sky over the city, perhaps auroras, perhaps wildfires in the countryside, perhaps just the fevered imagination of terrified citizens. Historians still argue whether this was a natural phenomenon or a colorful embellishment added later to make the fall seem preordained. The drumbeats grow louder, joined by the clatter of hooves and the occasional shout in a language that is not Latin. The guards along the wall begin to shift uneasily, their hands tightening around spear shafts. A runner bursts from the gatehouse, shouting for the market to clear. You step aside as families hurry past, clutching whatever they can carry. Clay jars of oil, small loaves wrapped in cloth, an heirloom bronze lamp. Some are weeping, others move in stunned silence. Then the sound changes. It's not just hooves anymore, but the low, creaking groan of gates forced open. You turn just in time to see the first wave enter. Horsemen in leather and furs, long hair flying in the wind, eyes scanning for valuables. Behind them, foot soldiers with axes and torches spill into the streets. There's no immediate screaming, just a stunned, eerie quiet, as though the city can't quite process what's happening. The horsemen ride past you, barely glancing in your direction, intent on the wealthier quarters. Somewhere in the distance, the first crackle of fire starts, and black smoke begins to rise. You drift through the streets as chaos unfurls in slow motion. A wine merchant's stall is overturned, crimson liquid pooling in the gutter like blood. A noblewoman drops her rings into a beggar's hand in exchange for a place to hide in his hovel. Priests rush from a basilica, clutching relics to their chests at the edge of the forum. You pause. The once proud columns stand tall, but their marble faces reflect the flickering light of burning homes. The statue of an emperor points forever toward the horizon, even as the empire it represents crumbles at his feet. For a strange, suspended moment, you realize you're watching the unthinkable become reality. Not in one catastrophic blow, but as a slow, uneven tide. One that began rising long before today, and will keep rising long after the last torch is extinguished. And still, above it all, the drumbeats echo, fading into the night. Asterisk. The smoke still lingers when you make your way beyond the gates, out into the patchwork of villas, farms, and half-deserted villages that ring the eternal city. The air carries a bitter tang, the smell of charred wood mixing with the faint sweetness of late summer grain. The countryside has always been Rome's silent partner, feeding the city, filling its markets, keeping its people alive. But as you wander the narrow dirt track, you notice how many farmhouses stand empty, doors hanging crooked, roofs sagging inward like tired shoulders. It's not a single, dramatic collapse anymore. This is something slower, quieter, and somehow sadder. The West doesn't fall with one mighty crash. It unravels thread by thread. You pass a crumbling roadside shrine, its painted fresco faded to pale ghosts of saints and gods, and you wonder when anyone last stopped to leave an offering. Mainstream fact: by the mid-5th century, the Western Roman Empire no longer had the centralized strength to control its territories effectively. Provinces began operating with increasing independence, and large swaths of land fell under the control of local leaders or invading tribes. Quirky tidbit: in some areas of Gaul, Roman tax collectors simply stopped showing up. Villagers, puzzled at first, quietly celebrated. They even developed local festivals around the vanishing of the collectors, a cheerful annual feast where nobody worked and everyone ate what they pleased. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine folk tradition or a satirical invention by later medieval chroniclers poking fun at Rome's bureaucratic decay. You arrive in a once thriving town square. The paving stones are still there, but weeds poke through the cracks. A stone fountain stands dry, its basin littered with wind-blown leaves. A single market stall leans against a wall, selling little more than rough bread, smoked fish, and a few misshapen apples. The few townsfolk you see move with a certain wariness. They glance up at the sky often, as though expecting danger to descend from above. When they speak, it's in clipped, quiet voices, Latin blended with the rougher sounds of local dialects. Rome's language is already beginning to change here, bending into something new. Past the square, you find the remains of a bathhouse. Its grand mosaic floor is still intact, tiny colored tiles forming a scene of dolphins leaping through curling waves. But the walls are blackened. The hypocaust, once an ingenious underfloor heating system, lies cold. Without central authority to maintain aqueducts, the water that once flowed freely now trickles only after heavy rain. A child appears in a doorway, peering at you with wide eyes. She's barefoot, clutching a wooden toy horse missing one wheel. She doesn't look frightened exactly, just curious, as though you're the unusual thing in her world. Behind her, an older woman calls sharply, pulling her inside before you can say a word. As you continue, you notice how many of the roads are in disrepair. Stones are missing, ruts deep enough to catch a cartwheel. Travelers bypass them entirely, walking along worn dirt paths that meander around the worst sections. You hear snippets of conversation, rumors of more raids to the north, talk of grain shortages, muttered complaints about the local lord who has more swords than sense. It's not the confident chatter of an imperial province anymore. These are the voices of people who know that help from Rome will never come. And yet, life hasn't vanished. In the courtyard of a half-ruined villa, a small wedding feast is underway. Strings of garlic and rosemary hang from an archway. Someone strums a lyre with surprising skill. The bride wears a crown of woven wildflowers. And for a moment, laughter drowns out the decay all around. It strikes you that this is how the West will fade, not into total darkness, but into a patchwork of small lights, each flickering on its own, too far apart to illuminate the whole land. You turn your steps eastward, following the long curve of the coast until the sea turns from restless green to a shimmering blue that reflects a sky so bright it almost hurts to look at. The journey carries you over mountains, through dry plains, and finally to a city that gleams like a promise, Constantinople. It rises from the horizon with a confidence the West has lost. Walls, triple-layered and daunting, wrap the city like a clasped hand guarding a precious jewel. The golden dome of Hagia Sophia catches the sun, spilling light across the harbor. Even the air smells different here. Salt from the Bosphorus mixed with the spice-laden tang of goods brought from markets as far away as India and China. Mainstream fact: after the division of the Roman Empire in 285 CE, Constantinople became the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, which preserved much of Rome's administrative system, architecture, and culture for nearly 1,000 years after the fall of the West. Quirky tidbit: one Byzantine court official supposedly had a pet lion that roamed the palace gardens, carefully trained to nap near the main walkways so visiting dignitaries would have to pass by it on their way to meet the emperor. Historians still argue whether this was an intimidation tactic or simply a very eccentric form of garden decoration. You pass through the gates and are immediately swallowed by the noise and motion of a city at its peak. Merchants shout prices in Greek, Latin, and half a dozen other languages. Silk banners flutter from balconies. Fishermen haul in nets that glitter with silver-scaled catch, while across the street, jewelers work hunched over tiny tools, setting gems into gold. Here, the imperial court still moves with the ceremony of old Rome. Eunuchs glide through corridors, scrolls tucked under their arms. Guards in ornate armor stand at attention, their spears tipped with polished steel. You catch sight of the emperors. Litter passing, a square canopy of purple silk, the sacred color reserved only for the ruler and his closest kin. And yet, you sense something different in the air. While Rome's power was once built on sheer territorial dominance, Constantinople's strength lies in its position as the gateway between continents. Gold flows through here like water, but so do ideas, fashions, and, occasionally, trouble. The city is both fortress and marketplace, both holy ground and den of intrigue. Monks in dark robes chant prayers in candlelit chapels, while in the same quarter, taverns echo with dice games and half-drunken songs. The hippodrome draws you in. Next, an immense arena where chariot races still whip the crowd into frenzied devotion. Teams are more than just athletes. They're political factions, capable of sparking riots that shake the city's very foundations. In one corner, a group of blue supporters. Yes, they literally call themselves the Blues, argue heatedly with their green rivals. And you remember hearing about the Nika riots years earlier, when such disputes nearly toppled the emperor himself. In the palace gardens, marble statues of Roman emperors stand shoulder to shoulder with depictions of Christian saints, a reminder that Byzantium walks the tightrope between the old world and the new. You stop at a high terrace overlooking the harbor. Below, the waters glitter with ships, some with square Roman-style sails, others with curved prows from far eastern seas. The docks smell of tar, citrus, and wool. Dock workers heave crates stamped with symbols you can't read, while scribes note each shipment with meticulous care. Constantinople is, in many ways, what Rome might have been if fortune had favored it. Here, bureaucracy still hums, roads are maintained, and the aqueducts carry fresh water without interruption. Yet it's not immune to the same undercurrents that pulled the West apart. Power struggles bubble quietly in the Senate chambers. Foreign envoys carry gifts that are really bribes, and the city's defenses, mighty though they are, will one day face tests as severe as any in the West. For now, though, the lamps will be lit at dusk, the city's walls will hold, and the streets will thrum with the sense that this is still the beating heart of a world that refuses to admit it has changed. You leave the golden domes and bustling harbors of Constantinople behind, traveling back toward the lands where Rome's grip has long since loosened. The roads are rougher here, patched in places with wood instead of stone. In some stretches, the famed Roman paving has been scavenged away entirely, carted off to build farm walls or new village churches. At first glance, the countryside seems almost peaceful, green fields rolling toward distant hills, flocks grazing under the watch of shepherds leaning on crooked staffs. But as you get closer, you notice something missing. There is no imperial tax collector coming down the lane, no patrol of soldiers making their rounds, no bustling town markets secured by the emperor's law. Authority now rests in smaller, closer hands. Mainstream fact. In the centuries after the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, centralized government collapsed in much of Europe. Local strongmen, often former military leaders or wealthy landowners, stepped into the vacuum, offering protection in exchange for loyalty and service. This system evolved into what we now call feudalism. Quirky tidbit. One early medieval lord supposedly demanded payment from passing merchants in the form of fresh eels, claiming it was a traditional toll on his lands. Historians still argue whether this was an actual legal custom or just his personal dinner plan. You make your way to a hilltop where a new kind of stronghold rises, a wooden motte and bailey fort. The motte, a mound of earth topped by a stout wooden tower, overlooks the bailey below, where a cluster of huts huddles inside a palisade fence. Here, the local lord rules over perhaps 100 souls, his reach extending only as far as a man can ride and return before nightfall. This is not Rome's sprawling bureaucracy. It is a personal network of oaths. The peasants till the land, hand over a share of the harvest, and in return they gain the promise of protection from raiders, bandits, or the lord's own rivals. In truth, protection is not always guaranteed, especially if the lord is away fighting in someone else's war. But in a fractured world, even the illusion of safety is worth something. You pass through the gate into the bailey. The smell of smoke and manure mingles in the air. Chickens dart between your legs, a dog barks lazily, and somewhere a hammer rings against an anvil. This little community is entirely self-contained. Blacksmith, baker, brewer, and carpenter all work within shouting distance of each other. The center of it all, the Lord's Hall, stands larger than any other building, its walls hung with shields and animal pelts. Inside, you can almost feel the tension that comes from living in a place where alliances shift as easily as the wind changes direction. Over supper, served in wooden trenchers with a side of gossip, the conversation turns to a neighboring lord, accused of breaking an oath. Some say he was bribed with silver, others whisper about a secret marriage alliance. You quickly realize that in the absence of imperial law, personal honor and vengeance have become the currency of politics. Outside, the land tells its own story. Fields are plowed in long strips, divided among families according to complex local customs. Forests, once carefully managed under Roman law, are now common hunting grounds, though trespassing in another lord's woods can still get you into trouble, sometimes of the very permanent kind. The people here know little of emperors or distant capitals. Their world is bounded by the reach of their lord's banner, the rhythm of the seasons, and the safety of their own walls. Yet from these scattered strongholds, a new order is slowly taking shape, one built not on the edicts of Rome, but on personal bonds, obligations, and the constant balancing act of survival. You leave the fort at dusk, the gate closing behind you with a heavy thud. Ahead, the road vanishes into the darkening countryside, and you can almost feel the map of Europe redrawing itself, not with the neat lines of empire, but with the patchwork claims of lords, knights, and vassals. The road winds downward into a shallow valley, where the first light of morning catches on a haze of chimney smoke. The sound of a blackbird cuts through the still air, followed by the muffled clatter of wooden wheels over rutted earth. You pass under an arch of intertwined oak branches, and suddenly you are in the center of a small village, the kind that now defines much of Europe's daily life. Here, the scale of existence is human-sized. You can see from one end of the settlement to the other in less than a minute's stroll. The houses are timber-framed, wattle and daub walls patched with clay, their thatched roofs dark with age and soot. Chickens wander freely, ducks splash in a muddy pond, and a pair of children chase each other with sticks while a piglet squeals indignantly in their path. Mainstream fact: during the early medieval period, the vast urban centers of the Roman world gave way to rural communities. Most people lived in villages of fewer than a few hundred residents, relying on subsistence farming and local trade. Large cities were rare, and the majority of the population rarely traveled more than a few miles from home. Quirky tidbit: in some villages, people believed that leaving your laundry outside on certain nights could invite elfshot, a sudden, mysterious illness blamed on invisible arrows fired by mischievous spirits. Historians still argue whether this was a superstition to explain disease or simply a clever way to keep the laundry from being stolen. You follow the main track to a low stone building that smells faintly of incense and candle wax. This is the village church, its walls rough but sturdy, the cross on its roof visible from nearly every field. The priest emerges, robes smudged with ash from the morning's fire. In a world where books are rare and few can read, the church serves as the repository of knowledge, law, and moral guidance. That a short walk beyond the village lies a monastery, enclosed by high walls. You slip through the gate and into an oasis of order. Neatly kept gardens, stone cloisters echoing with footsteps, the low hum of chanting drifting from the chapel. Inside the scriptorium, monks bend over parchment, their quills scratching lines of Latin into the margins of illuminated manuscripts. This is one of the few places where the memory of Rome's learning is still actively preserved, though even here the texts are as likely to be theological treatises as they are fragments of classical history. You join the villagers in the marketplace at midday. The stalls are simple, woven baskets brimming with apples, smoked fish hanging from hooks, small clay pots of honey. Barter is common. Coins are scarce, and even when they appear, they are often worn so smooth it's hard to make out the old imperial busts. That a woman trades a jar of butter for a length of dyed wool. A traveling peddler offers tin brooches in exchange for a few onions. The pace is unhurried, the bargain sealed with a nod or the clasp of a calloused hand. Yet beneath this slow rhythm lies a quiet efficiency. The people here know exactly how to survive through each season, how to store grain, when to slaughter livestock, which herbs to dry for the long winter ahead. Life is not without danger. A bad harvest can push the village toward famine. A raid by outlaws, or by that neighboring lord with whom relations have soured, can undo months of hard work in a single night. Yet the sense of community is tangible. When a cottage roof needs mending, neighbors gather without being asked. When a wedding takes place, the entire village attends, sharing food, music, and laughter under the open sky. You linger into the evening, the air scented with wood smoke and baking bread. A boy chases a hoop along the dirt track, his laughter echoing off the cottages. Somewhere, a woman hums while she stirs a pot over the fire. The shadows grow long, and the villagers begin to retreat indoors, shutters closed against the night. As you walk away, You realize you've just stepped through the heartbeat of the early medieval world, not the palaces or battlefields, but the everyday moments that carried people from one day to the next. It is slower, narrower, and harder than the Rome that came before, yet it is also grounded, resilient, and quietly enduring. The path carries you upward, away from the warm flicker of hearths and into the cool embrace of a forested ridge. The air is damp with the scent of moss and fallen leaves, and each step brings you closer to a rise where the land opens out in a sweeping view. You crest the hill, and there it is, a landscape caught between two worlds. Behind you, in memory, lies the marble and grandeur of Rome, aqueducts stretching across valleys, roads so straight they seem to defy the earth's curves, amphitheaters echoing with the roar of 100 voices. Before you spreads the new order, patchwork fields divided by hedgerows, clusters of thatched cottages huddled for protection, the steeple of a parish church rising modestly above it all. Mainstream fact: by the late 5th century, the Western Roman Empire had dissolved into a mosaic of kingdoms, each ruled by local lords or war chiefs. While the Eastern Empire, Byzantium, still held wealth and sophistication, the West entered a period we now call the early Middle Ages, where feudal ties and regional identities replaced the unifying structure of Roman authority. Quirky tidbit: some early medieval kings claimed descent from Roman emperors or even mythical heroes to bolster their legitimacy. One Frankish ruler allegedly traced his family line back to a sea monster. Historians still argue whether this was believed by the people or was simply a flourish for court poets with overactive imaginations. You stand and let the panorama sink in. In this view, you can trace the threads of continuity: Roman law, reshaped and adapted; Latin, evolving into new tongues; roads, worn but still guiding travelers between settlements. And you can see what is entirely new: manorial lands worked by serfs, wooden keeps on hilltops, markets that pulse only on appointed days. The empire's fall wasn't a single night of collapse. It was a slow drift, a long unweaving of a tapestry, thread by thread, as new hands rewove it into something else. You can imagine someone standing here centuries from now, looking back at this very moment and wondering how it felt to live at the hinge of history, to watch one world fade and another form. You take a slow breath, feeling the weight of centuries pressing softly around you, and turn to follow the narrow track down toward the valley, carrying the quiet knowledge that every ending, in its own way, is also a beginning. Asterisk. And now, the light begins to dim, not just in the sky above you but in the story itself. The voices of centuries grow faint, and the footsteps of emperors and peasants alike fade into the stillness. You linger in that half-light where memory and imagination blur, where marble columns dissolve into oak beams and the echo of Latin chants softens into the hum of a spinning wheel. The world around you is calm now, fields resting under a cool evening mist, the last glow of the sun laying a golden line along the horizon. Somewhere, in a quiet village, a hearth fire is banked for the night, and the steady breathing of sleepers fills the darkened rooms. You can let go of the rise and fall of empires, of battles fought and treaties signed. In this moment, there is no urgency, no danger, only the gentle truth that history moves at its own pace, and that you are safe here, resting on the shore of its long, slow tide. Breathe in, slow and deep, as though drawing in the centuries themselves. Let them settle in your chest like a warm weight. And as you breathe out, feel the day, this long day through Rome and into the Middle Ages, slip away, drifting into the quiet waters of sleep. The road ahead is soft, lined with shadows and starlight, and you can walk it without hurry, without fear. You've seen enough for tonight. Let the past stand where it is, unchanged, while you close your eyes and step gently into the rest that waits for you.